Hello all and welcome to finally Monday's History with Art are live. I've only put it off for 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, we only missed 1 week.
1 week? Okay. Well, there you go.
We just,
All right.
we just missed one. No, I take it back. We missed two.
Yeah, we missed two. See, I do know what I'm talking about on occasion.
And sometimes I don't.
All right, so today I did a radio edit, and we're going to do the Battle of Britain instead of another continuation of our previous two topics, because I felt that we fleshed out as much as we could out of that topic. So we're going to switch gears and move to the Battle of Britain. But before we do that, I'm going to say a couple of quick welcomes in chat. Of course, our panelists today, Ryan, Roger, Athay. Also, we have Question of Trek. Welcome. And let's see. We have Mark D. Infinitely Tired, Thomas Potts, Mrs. Canuck, of course. Welcome, my love. And then we have John DeMarco. We have Gorilla's Random Thoughts. We have Archer Collin. Welcome, sir. I'm going to say this for Archer Collin. Anything that you have a problem with this, please divert all comments to Ryan Roger Athay, because he is our UK specialist. So please refer all things to Ryan. He lives in the UK too, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Welcome, Orville Nation. And did I get everybody? I hope so. If not, I'm sorry. I didn't do it on purpose. All right. As I said, Ryan is here with us, and we're gonna try to nail out a little bit of an episode on the Battle of Britain. Battle of Britain, for those who are under a rock and don't know about it, is basically when the Germans decided that they were going to do a land invasion, but before they could do a land invasion, they had to defeat the RAF. They needed air superiority. In order for a channel crossing to have somewhat of a hope of hell of working, they needed the RAF out of the picture. Now, whether or not, I'm not going to debate today whether or not they could have still made the channel crossing even without the RAF because of something called the Royal Navy, but let's just, leave that for another day. So basically, we're talking about the air war over Britain, and it really has two phases. Which is the main one that everybody talks about. And then there's the V1, V2 experiment, which would just randomly cause bad days, especially the V2. The V2 was just no warning, just all of a sudden, pew, boom. Oh, darn. There goes a city block.
Yep.
But, and I downplay that, but yeah, it was, it's a topic that is, I feel, romanticized a little bit. And I'm gonna let my other panelists talk, I promise. But
take all the time you need.
Yeah, basically, I get into trouble when I talk about this topic. So why I chose it, I'm not 100% sure. But
maybe you should stop while you're ahead.
Because well, no, I never learn from my mistakes. What we do is, a lot of times we look back and we see it as a single nation versus Germany, the little island that could, as it were. And what's deceiving, and Ryan and I were talking about that behind the scenes, is it wasn't little old Britain against Germany. It was the entire British Empire, which is a completely different sentence. But it sounds better, little island that could, because you not only had the Canadians over in London, in Britain by this point, but you also had the Australians. And so it's not so much, I mean, a lot of some of the pilots were Canadian in the Battle of Britain, but you don't hear about that because we're basically the Commonwealth troops. So we're Britain. In these cases, we're just kind of, well, that's British troops. Well, they're from Canada. Yeah, but they're British troops. Don't worry about And so a lot of it comes down to I did change it. That's why. I would got distracted, and I'm not going to go into what happened, but as I was setting up the stream, there was some slight spelling errors because I was dealing with something on my phone while trying to type things, and it didn't. Brain stopped working because, yeah, brain stopped working. So I had to make some alterations. It should be spelt right now, I hope. If not, I'll fix it in
believe so.
post. If not, I will fix it in post. But so what we'll do is we'll go around the panel here finally, and I'll let you all kind of give your first impressions when you think Battle of Britain. What do you think? So this should be fun because we've got a Canadian, an American, and a Brit all in the same panel. So we all have different.
I think we should let our guests speak.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan, you take away.
Ryan.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. Well, when I first heard about the Battle of Britain as a kid, I bought into the romanticized version. You know, little island against the most powerful nation in Europe that has taken over almost all of Europe by mid 1940. And the actions of this evil German empire bombing British cities and towns, and that they're awful people, and that British people should rally together for the sake of survival. Now, in reality, it was quite different. In fact, as Canuck said backstage, it was actually the British who bombed civilian targets first in Germany before the Blitz took place. So most people, when they think of the Blitz, they think of the first phase in late 1940, mid to late 1940, until mid 1941. The second phase was when Germany was in retreat and firing V1s and V2 rockets straight at us and in France as well. But my first impressions were the romanticized versions. But in reality, it was two empires fighting it out to the death, and hopefully, ultimately, Britain survived, and Germany turned its attention east to the southeastern Europe, and ultimately to the Soviet Union. So that's it.
Jeff, we'll give you your moment in the sun before I start yammering again.
Going to give me time to speak? Oh,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
I know, it's so rare, right?
Yes, it is. No, I think Ryan did a nice summary there of what happened, and our the things that we think about the Battle of Britain, and how it's usually the victors that write history.
Yes.
And we were the victors, and so it was written in a way that glamorized us. And I'm sorry, my phone's going off, but in reality, Britain struck first. They were the first to do the airstrikes, and so war is hell, as they say, and both sides were hurting each other. They were fighting each other. They were sending their planes to each other and bombing the hell out of each other. So that's what happens in war.
Yeah. Well, and so the Battle of Britain really starts. The Luftwaffe, when the Battle of Britain starts, it's military targets. So it's the airfields, the radar stations. They didn't focus a lot on the radar stations where they really should have in retrospect, which was their own fallacy. But they were hitting the airfields, and they did push the RAF to the brink because they kept bombing the airfields. And you can replace planes, but it takes time to fix landing strips. It takes time to replace those planes if they're caught on the ground. And we look at things, like, for instance, one of the things that is vilified is when a British pilot would jump out of a plane. Unfortunately, what would happen is the fighter would then shoot the British pilot.
Mm.
And the reason is, well, if you let him live, he's just going to be another plane coming up to shoot you next time.
Yep.
Right. So,
Yep.
yes, it is a, savage way to do it. But if your end goal is to take out the RAF, well, if they don't have a pilot, they can't fly a plane. So what happens is an interesting shift in the bombing strategy. And what happens is a bomber is going down and it drops its load just outside of London. And there is some minimal damage to the outskirts, but nothing major. No, I don't think there was any deaths. I could be wrong, but it was very low impact. There wasn't a lot of, there wasn't a major casualty rate. And it was done by accident. It wasn't on purpose. It wasn't the mission plan. Well, after that, Churchill used that as an excuse to then bomb Berlin 5 days in a row. And then, of course, Germany, being Germany, has to then respond in kind. So the bombing is switched from airfields and military targets to going one for one. Well, you bombed us, we're going to bomb your cities now. The famous speech that is shown in the documentary after documentary after documentary after documentary of a certain German leader, because I don't know if I'm far enough into this video yet to say his name without it getting struck. Saying for every bomb that lands on Berlin, 1,000 will rain on London. Well, he said that after Berlin was bombed, which a lot of people leave out of their recalling of, well, no, we were just bombed. Well, no, the RAF did bomb Berlin too, so there's that. So it just, to me, it's always interesting how things are told. But if and I struggle to think about, but if the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, had stayed on course and not bombed the cities and just kept after the Air Force, I don't think the Battle of Britain would have gone the way it did historically. Because every bomb that landed on a city was one less bomb that landed on an airfield, one less bomb that landed on a radar depot, one less bomb that landed on the infrastructure. So if you take out a city block, well, 6 city blocks in London, well, okay, you have damage, you have body count, civilian body count, but your pilots, which is your main issue. So as long as the RAF is shooting down more planes than they're losing, then they no longer have to worry about fixing their airfields. They no longer have to worry about, having to protect the air bases because they're not the target. The target is, the cities. If the targets had remained the airfields, it could have been a much different outcome. Whether or not they could have ever actually done the crossing is another story. Because that would have been a long road to hoe, even without the RAF. Just because there was something called the Royal Navy. And I don't think they would have been all that happy about a channel crossing of any description. And that's another thing that is looked at too, is I find it a little annoying when you look at the documentaries, especially the early ones that were made on it. The only thing standing between Germany and taking over all of London was the RAF. Well, excuse me, folks, but did you forget about the Royal Frickin' Navy? I I think they would have had something to say about it. I'm just saying. The German Navy of World War II was not the German Navy of World War One. If you went ship for ship, even the ones that were, like, yes, the British Navy was strained and it was put on a very large base. You had it all the way from Singapore to London, but even the ships that are in harbor, in the main uh in in the main anchorage, the main battle fleet that has remained in London around the, protecting the English Channel, the Germans do not have the ships. They just don't. At any point of the war, can they go 1-to-1 with the main battle fleet of Britain ever?
I think that's why the U-boat initiative was such a crucial one for the German Navy. That's why the Atlantic War went on for as long as it did, because Germany's ship navy was way lacking because they focused mainly on the army and on the air force. But they were great innovators of submarines, so they did practice submarine warfare. Thankfully, the Allies got around that, and that's why so many submarines were sunk in 43, 44, and 45.
Yeah.
But in regards to the...
I was just going to point out, and even the Atlantic War, I'm going to have to do a show on that one day, because even that is... it's just by the numbers, like on paper, the numbers and how close Britain really came to having to surrender due to the shortages. World War One is where the submarines really had that effect. World War II, not so much.
Okay.
They did do a lot, but nowhere they didn't bring Britain as close to the table as they did in World War One. But yeah.
I mean, it's understandable, because I would hazard a guess that since Germany put all their resources into dominating on land and air, that they would seek to win the air war and then have a time of peace within Europe, dominating Europe. I don't think they initially planned a war on two fronts with the British Empire and the Soviet Union. It's only because Italy messed up in southeastern Europe that they went down there, and then they planned to betray their allies in the east. But in regards to the Battle of Britain, folks, as Canuck said early on, the Germans were winning, but but when Britain struck their civilian infrastructure, the German leadership stopped thinking with their head and started thinking with their heart, which can be a great strength at times, but also a great weakness. So the Germans changed their strategy, brought the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force, enough time to recover and respond, and ultimately won the Battle of Britain around early to mid 1941.
Yeah, well, there's a class, and I can't remember the date, so please forgive me, folks. But there's a classic moment where it's depicted in every Battle of Britain documentary, I think, that's come out to date, where Churchill himself is down in the air command, and he's observing the daily actions, and the Germans are launching. It was the last major air offensive that the Germans launched against Britain. And at one point, Churchill looks over and says, "What do we have in reserve?" And the man turns to Churchill and says, "Nothing. Everything's in the air." And the other problem they had that's come out post-war, so they didn't know this at the time, but the Germans, just like Navy, like in Navy combat, this happened a lot, but also in this case, overestimated how many planes they shot down and how many planes the British had. So right from the get-go, they underestimated how many actual planes the British had in the Air Force at the time available. They underestimated. Also, they overestimated how many planes were destroyed. So it became, you're going into a war believing that, well, your enemy can only put up X amount of aircraft. Meanwhile, the actual true number is much higher. So what ended up happening was, we've learned this now post-war because of journals and tellings from the Luftwaffe pilots who survived the war. And I mean, sometimes you have to take some of it with a grain of salt, but for the most part, it was very demoralizing because they'd be told that the British Air Force was on the brink of absolute destruction, that, you know, they were almost crushed. And every time they'd go over, there'd be just as many freaking Spitfires and just as many Hurricanes as there were the last time they went over. Right? And they kept getting told they're on the brink, they're on the brink, they're on the brink. Meanwhile, no, not so much.
Although, to be fair, during this period, the Americans, although neutral at this time, they wouldn't join the war until the attack on Pearl Harbor. But during the Battle of Britain, America, the United States of America, were providing support to the British through Lend-Lease, through convoys and such, although... Oh, yes.
Other wink, wink,
well,
nudge,
what I was going to say was that during this time, the United States was a shadow of what it is today, both economically and militarily. I know America isn't at its strongest in 2022, but believe me, folks, it was a lot weaker in 1940.
We're not. We're not in 2022.
Well, I don't know.
No, I agree with you completely.
Well, just, World War II on a large scale is really, there are so many things that happens during World War II, and by the time World War II is over, that shapes the world we live in now, and is the reason for certain things now. It makes me shake my head when people who supposedly have a higher education than me question whether they should really be teaching World War II in school anymore, because it happened so long ago.
That's ridiculous.
When you look at it and it's like, wait a second, 90% of the world's problems we have now, well, not 90, we'll say 70 because we'll be nice, emanate from things that happened at the end of World War II.
Oh, yes.
You know, reason why Russia got so big, etc., etc. Well, go back and look. You know, so a lot of World War II is the shaping of the world we live in now. To almost the same degree, you could say World War I, World War II, because World War I is the start and World War II is the final setup. But it's interesting how battles like the Battle of Britain are told, because we often take things at face value, and we often look at things and go, well, I wasn't there. How would I know? And then you look back and you go, well, if you use some common sense, unfortunately, it's not that common. You can read between
Certainly
the
not.
lines. And it's not to say that this is wrong. This is just, it's like, okay, but you have to be able to recognize when you're reading history, as I've always said, know who wrote it, know what side they were leading on, and then read from there. Because if you, depending on where you're reading this from, every conflict is a major victory or a major loss, depending on which side of the coin you happen to be on. And then depending on who's writing this, I mean, if you want to see what I mean by this, go back and look at some of the Roman writings about, their crusades and fun stuff. And you'll find out that the Roman military never had a problem. They just walked in, won, and went home. Then when you actually research that battle, you can find out that no, they didn't just walk in, beat them, and walk home. um, sometimes it took more than one try. But
Oh yeah.
such is golf.
Well, I think with experience, people learn not to believe things like that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is a lot of times things are very simplified, such as the
Mm.
the and it's formulated in certain ways because at the time it was formulated this way, even to this point, where it was lonely old Britain against all unbearable odds. Well, the reason that narrative was out there was because they wanted the United States to enter the war. So you can't ask for an ally to come and join you in battle if you're winning. If you've got it covered, they look at you and go, well, why would we bother? You've got things pretty much covered there. Why do we need to be involved? If you want them to join you, you show not a position of strength.
A position of struggle.
Yes.
More so than a position of weakness.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to show a position of struggle, because if you don't, then you're, it's just like your friend, if he, has a lot of money and, cars and boats, and he looks at you and says, well, I need your help with this. And you look at him and go, what the do you need me for? Now, if it's somebody who's, really struggling and, well, then you're more apt to help them. Right. So you look at the narrative.
Sorry. I was just reading something in the chat.
Yes, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. There we go. There's a question for you, Ryan, from Orville Nation.
Yes. How long has Ryan been the stuntman for John Rhys Davies?
I am no stuntman, ladies and gentlemen.
Or a
I am not a
stand-in.
strong. I'm not a physically strong individual. I do my best to not get into fights, and if I ever do get into fights, well, let other people do them for me.
Yeah, and
while I run away,
Tories, right? You just blame the Tories.
Especially where I live.
Forgive me, Ryan. Forgive me, Ryan. The first time that I saw you, that's what I thought too. You do have a striking resemblance.
Well, I know I've never appeared without this look, but there have been times when I was growing up when I didn't have any hair, or completely bald and completely shaven. Now, I might do that in the summer because it gets very warm sometimes in the South Wales valleys, as it also gets very cold. But I like this look, folks. I think it just screams me. But I could completely change it in the summertime.
Well,
you never know.
Yes. We'll have to do a poll. What should the new look be? We'll go Ryan Reynolds with the mustache. Yeah. But the Battle of Britain is an interesting thing to look at, because it shows many things. It shows how propaganda can be used positively and negatively. It shows how when a nation is focused and a nation is driven, what can be accomplished, because it was a great accomplishment that Britain was able to do what they did. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes, you had the British Empire, but what a lot of people don't know is behind the scenes, the British Empire had been in a little bit of trouble for a while, even pre-World
Oh,
War
yes.
II.
Mm.
So a lot of what we we look at, you can see, and it can be spun so many different ways, and it was that it's very interesting if you just look at that time capsule, because if you look at what was said at the time to what is said now, it's a little different depending on where you're getting your information from and who you're getting your information from. Some of the most interesting things I've ever heard of is the RAF pilots talking. If you ever get a chance to look at some documentaries with the surviving pilots, and they're going over what their days were like, and even Bomber Command is really interesting to really take a deep dive in. And I do recommend it. It is really interesting to just kind of dive in. But you do have to remember there are some biases there. And, you know, and I mean,
Yes.
you have to remember both sides did it, both the British side and the German side, of overestimating how many planes that were shot down, how many pilots were killed, how many, because even if you go to the Pacific War, there are cases of the Japanese stating that they sunk a battleship, and meanwhile it's still sitting there. And there's also cases of the United States saying that they shot down more zeros than were even in the battle area. Right? Like, there wasn't that many zeros there, but you shot them all down, did you?
They miscounted.
Yeah, miscounted by a couple hundred. No big deal. So these things happen in war, and if you can put that in the back of your mind when you're reading these things and you're going through it, you'll be fine. If you expect these numbers to be 100% accurate, you're going to be disappointed. Just a little bit.
Well, I'd just like to state that it's very difficult for a person, especially in the Western world, and educated within Western state-run education, to have a balanced perspective, especially in regards to the Second World War, because post-Second World War, all the horrifying revelations of what was going on in German-occupied Europe came out. They were released. They were dreadful. And it was very hard for anyone to have any sympathy with this nation that was annihilating people. Now, pre-World War II, Germany in peacetime in the 1930s was widely regarded in a positive manner, folks. They had managed to restore Germany during the Depression, and they were highly regarded, especially in the Western world. The United States, British Empire, less so the French Empire, because France always distrusted Germany. But they were widely regarded in the Anglo-Saxon world, let's just say that. So in regards to the modern day, of course people are going to side with Allied propaganda, let's just call it that, instead of having a balanced perspective, because of the sheer atrocities that were committed by the Axis forces, while we, on the Allied side, try to hide away our atrocities, especially on the Eastern Front, when we were allied with the Soviet Union, who were monsters folks.
Yeah.
The communists, the Soviet Union, were as bigger monsters as the Germans and the fascists.
Yep.
And we still treat them seriously in the modern day. I mean, we even trade with them in China, for God's sake.
I mean,
And they're
just
in our
ask Berlin.
countries. So.
Just talk to Berlin on that one.
Mm.
But it's
Indeed.
the Battle of Britain itself is used a lot of times as a battle cry. The Battle of Britain is when the tide turned. And yes, it is romanticized a bit, just a tad, as I pointed out. And I have to point that out because, well, I'm an a-hole. But it is romanticized a little bit. And it is a little told sometimes a little one-sided. But at the same time, you cannot discredit the struggle. You cannot discredit the pure determination of those men and women that, and I do say women because there was some, that made that possible. And it was actually a very major, there were some major things that came out of the Battle of Britain. Radar, the significance of radar was proven there. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the Germans soon, kind of learned after a while that they had to fly at a certain level not to be detected. But if you know how many are coming and in what direction, because that's another little thing that a lot of people don't understand. Once the planes hit the island, they didn't have radar anymore. Radar was only over the channel. So they would see them grouping, they would see them coming across the channel, but on Britain itself, they didn't have radar internal. It was
so
only
projections had to be made.
Yeah. So they would have the radar for the most part was early warning system. It was an early warning that the planes are coming. And then with the V1s, a lot of them got shot down over the channel. Which was a dangerous, and that's a story to go look into, is the crazy British pilots that would go and shoot those things down. Because basically you're shooting a bomb.
A flying bomb.
So you're shooting it, and if you're too close, you go with it. The V2s, there was no real defense against. They were just too fast, and they weren't as noisy as the V1s.
Although I would like to say that this was during a time, 1944, around that time when the V2s were most deployed. The V2, folks, was the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile. That is a missile that goes into the higher atmosphere and then goes straight back down. The kind of missile technology that we use for nukes. Now, 1944, Germany, they were on the back foot. They were bleeding on every front. Yet they still had the technological know-how to develop weapons that we were still many years away from making. That's how dangerous Germany was, even as it was dying at the end of the Second World War. Yeah. We were behind by quite a few years. It was only thanks to our numbers and our strength and determination, especially on the Eastern Front, because the communists would just chuck hordes of people straight at the Germans and just get slaughtered. They had the quality, in a sense, quality technology, while we had the numbers. And it just shows you that they had missiles that we had no way of countering. And it killed thousands of people towards the end of the Second World War.
Yeah. So the Battle of Britain, like I said, is usually broken up into two phases. The main one, where there was an actual danger of Britain losing, and then there was the secondary, which is your V1, V2 phase.
Mm.
And then the interesting part about it, I guess, one of the interesting spin-offs of the Battle of Britain is the facts that still confuse historians to this day. Because on one hand, Germany wanted to win against Britain. On the other hand, they could never make up their bloody minds whether they wanted to do it or they didn't.
Mm.
Because on one hand, there's the rumors and the, depending on who you listen to, certain German leader did not want war with Britain. Never did.
Mm. Mm.
France, sure. Britain, no.
Oh, yeah. Mm.
So there's that or there's that group of people. And then there, of course, is the other group where it's like, well, they just want to annihilate the rest of the world and to hell with it. It didn't matter who you were.
Mm.
And then there's the group in the middle. But there are some little tidbits where you could draw that conclusion. One would be Dunkirk.
Mm.
That's controversial.
Mm.
Britain itself, there were, and the other thing that doesn't come out is just how many times there were peace treaties sent from Berlin to London.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over and over and over again. That would just get like not even read and thrown in the wastebasket. But that's besides the point. Because once France had fallen, it is clear that the gentleman who was in charge of Germany, his focus was Russia.
Oh, yes.
That's
Definitely.
where he wanted to be,
Mm.
was Russia, not Britain. Russia. And he proved that when he decided to launch Barbarossa. But again, if he could, but he again didn't want a war on two fronts, which is why Stalin thought he was safe, because a war on two fronts is not sustainable. It's just not. So he figured he wouldn't invade Russia until after the fall of Britain, whether that be by peace treaty or by defeat. And the Battle of Britain shows what can happen when a group of people align with one goal, which was to keep the Germans out.
Yep.
And I mean, the amount of stuff that those pilots had to go through to keep that goal alive is insane. The amount of hours they were awake, the amount of sorties they flew. It is really a miracle that they pulled it off. So those listening, I don't want them to get the idea that I'm saying that they had it easy, because they didn't.
Oh, that's yes.
Right. So, but at the same time, I like to kind of give light to both sides of the coin here and not just be, oh, poor Britain, because during the progress of the war, we would see a lot more devastation to European cities, and it's not looked at half as bad as the bombing of London. So I always think we need to take a little bit of a grain of salt and a reality check here, folks. Sometimes it was bad. It was an absolute nightmare, especially if you were a civilian living in London, to hear those alarms go off. And then later on, it was even worse because the air raid sirens wouldn't go. Just all of a sudden, there'd be a fire 3 blocks down because a V2 landed. And, you know,
Well, what's always interested me is that because I've always supported the view that after the fall of France in June of 1940, Germany did not want, in my view, they did not want a war with the British Empire. Their main target was the Soviet Union. The main target of fascism in Germany was to wipe out communism, which was also an ambition shared by British imperialists to wipe out communism because it was a threat to the colonies of the empire. But it was one man, ladies and gentlemen, who I believe did not want to make peace, and that man was Winston Churchill. He
Yes.
did not want Germany to be the next world power. He wanted America to be the next world power,
Well,
with Britain
yes, no.
as a power alongside.
Yes, Britain had to
That's
retain its. Churchill did a lot of things wrong, but one of the things you cannot say about Churchill was he did not think with the betterment of the empire at heart. And this is completely off topic, but if you need any reassurance of this, check out where Churchill wanted to attack the Germans from. It wasn't France. It was the soft underbelly. Well, the reason that they wanted the soft underbelly was he wanted to make sure that the British colonies were protected. India, Pakistan, Africa. Needed to make sure those were fine. And that took priority over landing in France.
Turns out
he
the
had
soft
his priorities.
Well, talk about the soft underbelly. It turns out that it was the hardest of the lot because Italy and then northern Italy under German rule was actually the hardest to penetrate through.
Yes.
I mean, even at the end of the war in April, May 1945, the Allies had barely got to the Alps, and the Alps itself would have been a massive barrier between them and mainland Germany. By the time that the Allies spent 2 years fighting through Italy, I think it was 2 years, yes, 2 years fighting through Italy, the Eastern Front and the Western Front that opened up in 1944 had already met in what is now Eastern Germany. So, soft underbelly, my ass.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, and it was terrain. And things like that. But all right, so we're going to wrap this up here, and I'll give Jeff and Ryan a chance to promote whatever they need to promote. We'll start with our guest, Ryan. I know you have about 1 million videos to release within the next 5 minutes, so
not 1 million,
just 1 million.
Look, I released 150. I released 115 videos in March and took a day off. I released 120 videos in April and took a good few days off, 3 or 4 days off. This May, the first week of May, I plan to release about 35 videos, 3 today and another 32 for the rest of the week. And you can check me out on Brian Roger Athay, which is the channel that bears my name. It's quite easy to remember, hopefully. And hopefully you enjoy my thoughts on topics and people that I find interesting. I do take suggestions from the audience. If any of you have any suggestions, just put them in the comments section of this stream, and I'll make them into videos sometime next week. And hopefully I keep on growing, reach 500 subscribers, get that community tab, and open up suggestions to everyone, not just people who are casually watching, but also people who may come across me on, what is it called again? The YouTube main menu or whatever it is.
Yes. All right, Jeff, what do you have?
I'm just blown away by all the videos you put out, Ryan. It's just mind-boggling. But I find your videos very entertaining and informative. So keep doing them. You're doing a great job.
I just
All right.
wanted to
But as far
say
as go ahead.
I've been active for 6 months now. Hopefully by the first year anniversary of my second run, which is on October the 28th, 2022, I hope I can get to 1,000. But that's just a pipe dream. I never thought I'd get anywhere near where I'm at. Certainly this quickly, folks. So
Yes.
thank you,
Well, the way you're
everyone, for
going, I
watching
think
this
you'll
stream.
make it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
All right,
I've-
Jeff, what do you have in the cooker?
Well, as a lot of you probably already know, I'm one of the co-hosts of A Question of Trek, and we have episodes on Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'd love to have you there. If you love Star Trek, if you love quiz shows, this is the show for you. We have a lot of great banter, a lot of fun. We have terrific animations. You should check out our latest one from yesterday. We got a new intro in that one, so come on over to the channel and check us out. Subscribe. We'd love to have you there, and maybe have you on the show itself. If you want to play the game, let me know, or let Continuum Trek know. I think Conti was in the chat earlier. So check us out Sundays at 4:30 p.m. A Question of Trek.
Oh yes, and Mrs. Canuck does point out something that I should bring to your attention, Ryan. When did I get married again?
Look, Rambling. I made quite a few assumptions during that video. I thought you had been together for years, for many, many years.
Off by that much. Yeah, so there's that. But yeah, I had to kind of bug you with that because Mrs. Canuck put it in the chat. So and if you don't get that joke, then you got to go watch his video on Mrs. Canuck, and then you'll get it. So we're gonna have some new shows coming to History with R&R. Hopefully, I will get Midway done so that it is out by the middle of May. Hopefully, and then who knows? Maybe we'll even have a part for Ryan to record, and he can be in one of our.
Oh, that'd be great.
But
can't wait for the next radio show.
Yes,
they're always fun.
So, yes, with that, I will say thank you and good night.
Have a great day, folks.